The elevator doors were closing when her hand shot between them. My stomach dropped. After months of elaborate schemes to avoid being alone with her, here I was, trapped in a metal box with the one person who made my heart race uncontrollably. My boss, Eliza Chen. As she stepped inside, her jasmine perfume filled the small space, and when our eyes met, I knew my carefully constructed walls were about to come crashing down. Hey everyone! If you're enjoying this story so far, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content that explores those complicated moments when work and feelings collide. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how this elevator ride changes everything. I never planned to fall for my boss. In fact, I'd spent the last 4 months doing everything possible to avoid her. But sometimes, fate has other plans. My name is Daniel Reeves, and until 4 months ago, I was a perfectly functional 28-year-old graphic designer at Horizon Creative. I had a decent apartment, a small circle of friends, and a job I genuinely enjoyed. Then everything changed when our department got a new director. The first time I saw Eliza Chen walk into our office, I nearly spilled coffee all over my keyboard. She wasn't what anyone expected. At 32, she was younger than most directors, with a reputation for brilliance that preceded her. But it wasn't her impressive resume that caught me off guard, it was everything else about her. Eliza had this way of commanding a room without raising her voice. She stood about 5'6", always dressed in tailored blazers and trousers that somehow looked both professional and effortlessly cool. Her dark hair fell just past her shoulders, and she had these intense brown eyes that seemed to see right through you. When she smiled, which wasn't often in those early days, it transformed her entire face. "I'm looking forward to working with all of you," she said during that first meeting, her gaze sweeping across the conference room before landing on me for what felt like a second too long. I nodded awkwardly and looked down at my notepad, suddenly fascinated by my own terrible handwriting. The problem wasn't just that I found her attractive. The problem was that I found everything about her captivating. The way she spoke with such clarity and purpose. How she could cut through hours of circular discussion with a single insightful comment. Even the little crease that appeared between her eyebrows when she was concentrating. And so began my elaborate avoidance strategy. I started arriving at work 15 minutes earlier than usual to get settled before she came in. I scheduled my lunch breaks to ensure they never aligned with hers. I volunteered for projects that required me to work with other departments. I even began taking the stairs instead of the elevator, just to minimize the chance of accidental encounters. My friend and coworker, Tasha, noticed immediately. "What's with you lately?" she asked one day over lunch in the courtyard, safely away from the office. "You practically dive under your desk whenever Eliza walks by." "I don't know what you're talking about," I mumbled, suddenly very interested in my sandwich. Tasha rolled her eyes. "Please. You've been acting weird since she started. Do you hate her or something?" I almost laughed. Hate was the absolute opposite of what I felt. I don't know. I get nervous around her. "Because she's the boss?" "Yeah," I said, grateful for the excuse. "Exactly." Tasha didn't look convinced, but she dropped it, and I was relieved. How could I explain that every time Eliza asked for my opinion in a meeting, my mind went completely blank? Or that I'd spent an embarrassing amount of time wondering if the small silver ring she wore on her right hand had any special significance? My avoidance tactics worked reasonably well for the first few weeks. We interacted during team meetings and when absolutely necessary for projects, but I managed to keep a professional distance. I thought I was being subtle. I wasn't. About a month after she started, Eliza called me into her office. My heart hammered against my ribs as I walked the short distance from my desk to her door, which was always open unless she was in a private meeting. "Daniel," she said, looking up from her computer. "Come in. Close the door, please." Those 5 words sent my anxiety spiraling. Closed-door meetings were never good news. I sat in the chair across from her desk, trying to appear calm while my palms grew sweaty. "Is everything okay?" she asked, getting straight to the point. "Yes," I said, too quickly. "Everything's fine." "Why?" She leaned back slightly in her chair, studying me. "I've noticed you seem uncomfortable around me. If I've done something to cause that, I'd like to know." My face burned. She'd noticed. Of course she'd noticed. She noticed everything. "No, you haven't done anything," I assured her. I've been dealing with some personal stuff. It's nothing to do with you." It was the biggest lie I'd ever told at work. Eliza nodded slowly, not entirely convinced. "Okay. But if there's ever an issue with my management style or anything else, my door is always open." Literally, she added with a small smile, gesturing to her typically open door policy. "I appreciate that," I said, already standing to leave before she could ask any more questions. After that conversation, I redoubled my efforts to act normal while maintaining my distance. I spoke up more in meetings to show engagement but escaped as soon as they ended. I submitted my work ahead of deadlines to avoid last-minute consultations. I was the model employee who somehow never had a moment for casual conversation. Then came the Henderson project. Henderson & Sons was a major potential client, a family-owned furniture company looking to rebrand for their 50th anniversary. Landing them would be huge for Horizon, and Eliza selected a small team to work on the pitch, including me. "Your portfolio shows you have a good eye for balancing tradition with modernity," she told me when she assigned me to the project. That's exactly what Henderson needs. I was simultaneously thrilled by the professional recognition and terrified by what it meant, long hours working closely with Eliza. The team consisted of just 4 people, Eliza, me, Tasha, and Marcus from the copywriting department. We were given the conference room at the end of the hall to use as our project space, walls soon covered with inspiration boards, competitor analyses, and draft concepts. For 2 weeks, I managed to maintain my careful distance by focusing intensely on the work and making sure I was never alone with Eliza. If Tasha and Marcus left, I'd suddenly remember an urgent email I needed to send or a reference I needed to grab from my desk. But as the pitch date approached, the late nights became inevitable. One evening, around 8 p.m., I was making final adjustments to the presentation slides when I realized everyone had left except Eliza and me. I glanced up to find her watching me from across the table, her blazer discarded hours ago, the sleeves of her white shirt rolled up to her elbows. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, a few strands escaping to frame her face. "You should go home, Daniel," she said softly. "You've been staring at those slides for hours." "I'm almost done," I replied, not meeting her eyes. "Just want to make sure everything's perfect for tomorrow." She stood and walked around the table, stopping beside my chair. I could smell her jasmine perfume, fainter now after the long day but still distinctly her. "Let me see," she said, leaning down to look at my screen. Her shoulder brushed against mine, and I froze, suddenly hyper-aware of how close she was. I could see the faint freckle near her temple, the way her eyelashes cast tiny shadows on her cheeks in the harsh fluorescent light. "This looks great," she said, pointing to the screen. "But I think we should swap these 2 sections. End on the stronger visual." I nodded, making the change automatically while trying to ignore the warmth radiating from her proximity. "There," she said, straightening up. "Now we're done. Let's get out of here." We packed up in silence, and I deliberately took my time gathering my things, hoping she'd leave first. No such luck. We walked to the elevator together, and I pressed the button, praying for it to arrive quickly. "You've been avoiding me," she said suddenly. It wasn't a question. I looked at her, startled by her directness. "What?" "No, Daniel," she cut me off, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm not blind. Or stupid." The elevator arrived with a soft ding, saving me from having to respond immediately. We stepped inside, and I pressed the button for the lobby, wishing the ground would open up and swallow me whole. "I'm sorry," I finally said as the elevator began its descent. It's not personal." She raised an eyebrow. "Feels pretty personal from where I'm standing." I stared at the illuminated floor numbers, watching them count down. "It's complicated. Try me." The elevator reached the lobby, doors sliding open to reveal the empty reception area. Everyone else had gone home hours ago. We walked toward the exit in silence, the tension between us almost tangible. Outside, the night air was cool, a welcome relief from the stuffiness of the office. "My car's in the garage," she said, nodding toward the adjacent building. "You?" "I take the subway," I replied. She hesitated, then, "Let me drive you home." "It's late." "That's really not necessary." "Daniel," she said, and something in her voice made me look at her directly for the first time all evening. "Please. Just let me drive you home." I don't know if it was exhaustion or the unusual vulnerability in her request, but I found myself nodding. The drive to my apartment was quiet at first, just the low hum of the car's engine and the occasional directions I provided. Her car was immaculate, like everything else about her, with a single small plant in a geometric pot on the dashboard, the only personal touch. "You're very talented," she said as we stopped at a red light. "Your work on the Henderson project has been exceptional." "Thank you," I said, surprised by the compliment. "But it's been a team effort." "True. But your contributions stand out." She glanced at me briefly before returning her attention to the road. "That's why I don't understand why you've been so determined to keep your distance." I looked out the window, watching the city lights blur past. "I told you, it's complicated." "Work relationships often are," she said carefully. "But they're still relationships. They require communication." We arrived at my apartment building, and she pulled up to the curb, putting the car in park but leaving the engine running. I should have thanked her for the ride and gotten out. Instead, I found myself turning toward her. "I avoid you because I don't trust myself around you," I admitted, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "Because every time you're near me, I can't think straight. Because you're my boss, and these feelings are completely inappropriate, and I've been trying really hard to be professional about it." The silence that followed was deafening. Eliza stared at me, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "I should go," I said quickly, reaching for the door handle. "I'm sorry. Please just forget I said anything." "Daniel," she said, her voice stopping me. "Wait." I turned back, bracing myself for the gentle letdown, the reminder about workplace policies, the awkward conversation we'd have to have with HR tomorrow. Instead, she leaned across the console and kissed me. It was brief, just the soft press of her lips against mine for a few heartbeats, but it sent electricity coursing through my entire body. She pulled back, her eyes searching mine. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," she whispered. I stared at her, unable to process what had just happened. "But, you're my boss." "Yes," she acknowledged. "Which is why I've been trying very hard not to do exactly what I just did." "I don't understand." She sighed, turning off the engine. "Why do you think I picked you for the Henderson project? I could have chosen anyone in the department." "Because of my portfolio," I said, repeating her earlier explanation. "Partly," she admitted. "But mostly because I wanted an excuse to work with you more closely. And then you kept finding reasons to leave whenever we were alone, and I started to think I'd misread everything." I laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "You've been trying to get closer while I've been doing everything possible to keep my distance." "Apparently," she said with a small smile. "What happens now?" I asked. She looked down at her hands on the steering wheel. "Now we have a decision to make. The professional thing would be to pretend this never happened and go back to our working relationship. And the unprofessional thing? Her eyes met mine again. Would be to acknowledge that there's something here worth exploring, and figure out how to do that without compromising either of our professional integrity. Is that even possible? I don't know, she said honestly. But I'd like to try. If you would. I thought about all the months I'd spent avoiding her, the elaborate schemes, the missed opportunities for connection. And then I thought about how it felt when she kissed me, like finally finding something I hadn't even known I was looking for. I'd like that too, I said. She smiled then, a real smile that lit up her entire face. Good. But we should probably talk about this when we're not sitting in my car outside your apartment at nearly midnight before the biggest pitch of the quarter. I laughed. That's fair. Get some sleep, Daniel, she said. We have a presentation to nail tomorrow. I nodded and opened the car door, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm glad you kissed me first. I never would have had the courage. I know, she said with a hint of mischief in her eyes. Why do you think I did it? The Henderson pitch was a success. We landed the account, and the celebration at the office was euphoric. Champagne was poured, congratulations exchanged, and through it all, Eliza and I maintained a careful professional distance, exchanging only the occasional glance that held the weight of our shared secret. The following weeks were a delicate dance. During work hours, we were strictly professional, perhaps even more so than before. But after hours, we began to explore the connection between us, starting with coffee at a cafe far from the office, then dinner at a restaurant in a neighborhood where we were unlikely to run into colleagues. We talked about everything, our families, our aspirations, our fears. I learned that Eliza had moved to the city 5 years ago after ending a long-term relationship that had grown stagnant. That she had a younger sister she adored and parents who still didn't quite understand her career choice. That she collected vintage cameras but rarely used them, finding more joy in the possibility they represented than in actual photography. In turn, I told her about growing up as an only child with parents who divorced when I was 12, about my brief stint trying to make it as an illustrator before finding my way to graphic design, about my dream of someday creating a graphic novel based on my grandfather's stories of immigrating to America. With each conversation, the initial attraction deepened into something more substantial. I wasn't just drawn to her beauty or her intelligence anymore. I was captivated by her complexity, by the person beneath the professional exterior. But our situation remained complicated. Office relationships were not explicitly forbidden at Horizon, but relationships between managers and their direct reports were strongly discouraged. We knew we were walking a fine line. I've been thinking, Eliza said one evening as we walked through the park after dinner. About us. About work. My heart sank. Here it comes, I thought. The reasonable conclusion that this was too risky, too complicated. There's an opening in the digital marketing department, she continued. Senior graphic designer position. Better pay, more responsibility. I stopped walking. Are you trying to get rid of me? She laughed, taking my hand. No, you idiot. I'm trying to make it possible for us to date without the ethical complications. If you worked in a different department, I wouldn't be your direct supervisor anymore. Oh, I said, feeling foolish. That actually makes a lot of sense. I know it does, she said, squeezing my hand. The only downside is I wouldn't get to see your face every day at work. But I think I could manage if it meant seeing you outside of work without all this sneaking around. I considered it. The position would be a step up career-wise, and it would solve our immediate problem. But something didn't feel right. What if I don't get the job? I asked. Or what if I do, but then things don't work out between us? I'd have changed departments for nothing. She nodded, acknowledging the valid concerns. That's why it has to be your decision, based on what you want professionally. If the job interests you, apply for it. If not, we'll figure something else out. I appreciated her thoughtfulness, the way she was trying to find a solution that respected both our personal and professional lives. It was one of the